Hey guys, what is up? So this is the Developer Diary episode 1 for my React Visual Docs project. If you missed the introduction episode, I'm going to link it up there as well as in the description. So this is the first episode that's not the introduction episode, and I'm about a month or so into the project, and I have not written a single line of code. So why is that? Am I lazy? Maybe. Am I just procrastinating? That's probably also part of it. But another part of it is that I'm currently defining the scope of the project. So before I'm writing any code, I'm actually going to define what that code should do. And that makes a lot of sense when you say it. It seems pretty obvious, but it's kind of not obvious. When you get into projects, especially when you're doing independent projects, the scope seems like it should just come naturally. It seems like when you define your scope, you shouldn't just narrow yourself down to a specific set of requirements. It feels limiting. It feels like you're doing work and it's just not fun. But the reason why you have to do it is because if you don't define your scope, you're not going to know when your project is finished. And you're going to also go outside of what you actually want to accomplish, and you're going to start doing things that are fun but aren't necessarily working towards the feature set that you want as a base feature set in your project. When you get into writing code and it's boring, you want to make it more fun. So what defining your scope helps you do is just nail down a basic feature set that you want to get to, and then if you achieve that, then you can move on and do the other fun ideas that you had while you were doing the project. But it's important to know what is a priority and to get that done first before you start doing extra things that are a bit more fun and a bit more what you want to do. So today we're going to dive into the scope. I'm going to tell you what the actual features are going to be of the application and the tool that I'm building and what technologies I've decided on to use. Like I said, I haven't written a single line of code yet, but I've had the time to do some research and I've had the time to look at what technologies I want to use. All right, so let's dive into that now. All right, so let's move this over here a little bit. There we go. Okay, so here we have the React Visual Docs. I have it on my GitHub. Again, that's linked in the description if you want to take a look at it in more detail. But yeah, so here's the introduction to the report. I have other reports in here as well. You can go check those out. Research reports, initial project proposal, and all that fun stuff. So, but this is the third report. This is the scope and features. This is the finalized scope and features and what I'm actually going to work off of. So the introduction here says, this report outlines the specific scope and features of the React Visual Docs project in the form of user stories, which are prioritized as core functionality for the minimum viable product, or MVP, are the main focus of the development sprints later in the project timeline. See the project overview for that. User stories, which are not in the MVP, are out of scope and are intended to be implemented only once all MVP user stories are fully implemented. So that basically means I've defined stuff that is in scope, and then I've defined stuff that could be considered as in scope, but I'm not going to focus on that first. I'm going to focus on a few things for the minimum viable product first, and then if I have time, then I'll do those other things. Another note, it's important to, when you're documenting stuff, give an introduction or an abstract or a summary to the document that you're doing, just so if people are reading it, they can read the introduction and see if they want to read the rest of the document. So section 1, I have a feature overview, I've devised that into command line interface, source code parser, and the document graphical user interface. So the command line interface is going to be very basic. All it's going to do is do three things: initialize the React visual docs in an existing React project. Then it's going to parse all of the, it's going to do the parsing of the JavaScript files. It's going to kick that process off and then actually output the documentation for the existing project that you're running the command in. And then there's also going to be a command to launch the documentation user interface. Then there's the source code parser. That's going to be based off of react.js, which is a library that already exists in the open source community. I'm going to use that as a base and build off of it. And the information that's actually going to extract from the source code is prop types and or flow types, depending on what typing system you're using for React. If you're unfamiliar with those, go check out Flow and the prop types project. I'll also have those linked as well in the description. It's going to parse out component methods and their types if they have flow types. It's going to parse out format inline comments. And so far these three features are already in the react.js project. I don't have to do anything to parse those out. That's just as is. The big one here is file interdependencies. That is something that is my major focus of this project. And that's something that the react.js project currently doesn't do. So I'm going to have to actually modify the project. I'm going to have to look for import statements in different files. And I'm going to have to go find those files in the folder structure, and then kind of make a interdependency table to just kind of aggregate those files together and make sure I have all the interdependencies of each file. So this is like the main feature that I'm going to actually have to focus on when I'm doing the source code parser. And the third part is the documentation user interface. So that's going to actually display the information that's taken from the source code parser, and it's going to display it in a web browser. So I'm going to use create React app as a base for that. I'm building a React documentation generator using React. So it's a bit cyclical in the and a bit recursive in the development of that. So now what's out of scope is file statistics. So this is something that I looked into using some data from Git. You can actually parse out some information about file statistics. The reason why this is out of scope is because it involves implementing a feature that is already available in tools like GitHub and Bitbucket. So it doesn't really add much unique value to the project. So that's why that's out of scope right now. But it's something that I want to implement in the future. Browser support's another thing. I don't want to have to do testing on Internet Explorer and stuff, and it's just not worth it right now to do that. That's just probably going to be permanently out of scope. I'm probably never going to provide full support for browsers, since most developers have up-to-date browsers. And the last thing is module level interdependencies. So when I said I want file interdependencies up above, that is just which files call which other files, and then you have but the thing with JavaScript is that you can export multiple modules per file. So the reason why that's not in the MVP is because you can export modules in multiple different ways, and then you have to look into how that file is being imported. There's just a few different ways to do it, so that's a bit more complex, and therefore it's going to be a down the road sort of thing. I want to get the file interdependencies into the project, and then I'll work on getting the module level interdependencies once everything else is done. So then the technology stack, command line interface, I'm going to build it with Node.js, so then I can import it as a Node module into a build process like Webpack or Gulp. The source code parser, That's going to be using react.js as I mentioned before, and also using Node as well, since it's going to be integrated with the command line interface. And then the documentation user interface, like I said, I'm going to use React. I'm also going to use Redux, since it's good with managing applications with large amounts of data. Has a lot of advantages for managing data over other libraries for data flow like Flux and MobX. Also for data visualization. So I'm going to take the interdependencies that I've parsed out, and I'm going to actually build like different graphs with the D3 library. D3 stands for data-driven documents, and that's just a bunch of JavaScript that will produce charts and graphs and everything for you, and really help you visualize the data that you have. So I think that's going to be like probably the main feature of this that makes it stand out from other React documentation tools that are out there currently. So user stories, this is what I was getting at with defining project scope. So I've defined a few as like an example right now, and then I'm going to move into defining these a bit more thoroughly as the project progresses, and at the start of each sprint I'll like define the user stories that I want to actually complete for that sprint. And that will allow me to kind of like change the scope as the project goes along if I want to. Just because I've defined a scope now doesn't mean I can't change it later. I'm using an agile development method, so that allows for scope to change very easily. And that's what I'm trying to strive for right here. Like if I run into something that I think would be a really good feature, and it has a greater priority than what I currently have planned to do, then I'm obviously going to do the thing that's better for the application in the long run. So examples of user stories here. User stories are generally defined like from the perspective of a user. So for example, the first one here is, as a developer, I would like to initialize React visual docs in my React project. So that's the functionality that should be output when this feature is complete. I have a section for scope here where I've defined the scope a bit more specifically for that user story, and I've also defined what is out of scope, and I've given a field for related stories if there's anything that's related, any dependencies. So if a story has to be completed before another one, that will go in there. And there's also point estimation. So point estimation is just kind of like defining how complex the task is. I haven't defined any points for these yet. That's going to be done in the sprint planning phases in the future development sprints. So yeah, that's basically it. I've also put in issues here. These are just reiterations of those user stories I've defined. They're just using GitHub's issues feature, and that's just kind of where they are. That's where they'll live. And then over in the project section, you can see I have a project for MVP for this repository, and I have user stories in there under the to-do. As I complete them, I'll move them over to in progress and then over to done. So if you want to, you can actually track where the development is of these features on your own if you go to the GitHub. So that's pretty much it for the scope. If you have any questions, of course, leave them down in the comments. If you have any suggestions for the project as well, love to hear them. Make sure to like, share, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next episode.